Hi, Amelia Lyons, Clinical Supervisor Group Analyst. And in this tutorial, I'm talking about resistance to clinical supervision. Now, whenever I see a sign like the one below, I think of Maggie, 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 out, out, out. Now, only some people in the UK will understand that. I won't explain that any further. But let's just say that I'm a fan of healthy resistance. So, when can it be healthy? Because we often go in as clinical supervisors, we want to help people and get a bit upset and take it quite personally when people are a bit resistant and standoffish to the idea. And clinical supervision in the health professions is about enabling colleagues, peer professionals, others to learn from their experience on the job, to have a place to debrief, and to talk about their personal and professional reactions to work. So we go into a ward, let's say, and we're offering some clinical supervision, and colleagues are a little bit on the reluctant side. So clearly resistance can be healthy in terms of it's natural to take some time to trust and build up trust in any kind of relationship. Sometimes supervisors may get sent into wards that are not competent, that are not trained, and that don't really know how to manage, and that can provoke resistance, and that's healthy. The organisation can have mixed agendas. Again, they can send in supervisors, and that might be seen as some sort of a management agenda, and there may be some that may be treated with some suspicion by professional staff. Then we have our own natural defences. Speaking as somebody who's trained in analysis, psychoanalysis, we can say that all of these defences that we have within us are quite natural, are there for a reason, and you really need a very safe, strong relationship before you think about unpacking some of that and enabling somebody to look at why they're resisting something. There might also be colleagues might be experienced as resistant, and actually they may have a hidden disability. Only the other day I had a group on screen and somebody wasn't visible to me, and I said, would they mind making themselves visible? And they said, well, actually they had a sight problem, and that they just found listening to people on the group to be the most helpful thing. So that was interesting, because actually they learnt a lot by just hearing people's voices, and that worked for them. So that actually brought an extra dimension into the discussion. But on the face of it, initially it looked like resistance, like they weren't showing themselves to the group, and what was all that about? Other interventions might be more effective for the health professionals, so there may be certain things that they might bring to supervision, or they might bring to their own therapy, or they might have another reflective practice group that they're bringing some issues to. So there may be a range of things that they're actually doing already that they may not need to or wish to bring something to another arena, but rather complete the cycle in the original arena. So, and then finally, colleague of mine, I remember talking to him one time about issues, and him saying back to me, Amelia, people sometimes just need a place to hide. And immediately he said that made me think about me as a child. And I used to love dens, and I used to love playing hide and seek, and I absolutely loved having places around the house and all sorts of spaces really to hide. And I just really got that. So yeah, I think sometimes people just need to hide and regroup and metaphorically get under the table for a while and put a blanket over themselves and just retire for a bit. hopefully come out soon. So why the resistance then? When it's let's assume now that we've covered the healthy resistance, why is there still resistance? So there can still be fear of reprisal, loss of feeling of loss of control in supervision. So the supervisee really needs to own themselves in the supervision and to use it. So if it's seen as something for the supervisor and it's not for me as supervisee, then why should I use it? So there's an issue about ownership that we need to work with the supervisee. There may still be, even if there isn't, there may still be some fantasy about a managerial involvement and being scrutinised. And as long as that's around, then clearly the supervisees are going to be careful about what they say. So in other videos, I've explained the difference between management supervision and clinical supervision. And essentially the agenda for management supervision is about getting the job done. The agenda for clinical supervision is about learning from the job, and the clinical supervision should be undertaken by somebody who's not on the managerial hierarchy. If it is on the managerial hierarchy, then they can expect supervisees to be more resistant in the process, and rightly so. We might again label that as healthy resistance. Sometimes supervision can be perceived as an unacceptable intrusion into work rather than a positive relationship. Again, this can quite often apply in wards, in hospitals where professionals are offered supervision. They're seen to be stressed, management want to help them, and yet they resist the help that's offered. And again, this may come back to sort of the pacing, the building up of trust, and overnight staff are not just going to engage in supervision because management want them to. They need a strong, regular, consistent professional relationship to respond to that in due course. In cases where there is resistance, there may be more suppression of emotions rather than expression of emotions. Some of that can again relate to the ward culture. If the ward culture is that we're sort of strong and invincible and we don't really agree with people being weak enough to seek supervision and outside as it's perceived help, because wards are quite closed environments, they sort of function a bit like little bunkers, and outside people are always seen as something to be suspicious of, careful about, concerned about what are they doing here. So that's patience, that's persistence, and it's not something that you can solve in a session or two. You have to keep going back, and the proof of the pudding is in the work that you do, and over time that will ease. There's a natural general anxiety about being vulnerable or exposed, and some people feel that more strongly than others. Some people may have been ridiculed or trivialized in their early learning lives, in their school lives, at home in their families, for showing vulnerability. And they're then going to be less likely to be open to the process and going to take more time. Often there are fantasies that I've experienced in the organisation by both management and staff about supervision. Staff have quite often the fantasy of it's a management plot. Somebody perceives my work as being inadequate, and that's why they've sent a supervisor to look at it. And even the very name supervisor implies that somebody knows more about your job than you do. So there's a kind of natural sort of hunkering down in relation to that. And then in relation to management, we'll sometimes see supervision as an excuse for staff to bitch about them, and they don't really like that. And even colleagues and staff can almost try and prevent the staff member going to receive the supervision when they're on duty, because why are you leaving the ward? You're leaving us here with the patients. That feels like a betrayal, and it takes quite a strong-minded member of staff to resist that. Driscoll talked about reasons why supervisees find it difficult to share or prioritise what to discuss. And what's interesting about this, I think, is that he talks about things like the supervisee not realising that a particular story is worth exploring, not being used to reflecting on practice, feeling a bit unsafe, not making notes, using informal chats, being a bit unwilling to expose oneself, wanting to pack too much in and overdoing it, filling up the time, not stopping for pausing for breath. And again, perhaps not feeling in control of the clinical supervision. So those are all sort of clear reasons why there might be some resistance going on in supervision. Now, how do we overcome that? So how we work with that, we think about the relationship, that it's so important to provide that open, trusting relationship, and the fit and the match needs to be good. It's helpful, if we can, to offer a choice of supervisor. We need to offer that safe space. Now, often in this day and age, supervision will be offered over something like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and we need to protect that online privacy. So people wandering in and out of the house at home, supervisors need to be absolutely vigilant about that, because otherwise that's not really showing respect to your supervisee. Supervisors need good training, they need to foster some independence of thought, learning is the focus, and diversity of supervision group is also a very good principle to have. In health, what I always pursue with a sort of vengeance really is a cross-disciplinary group. So rather than having a group of nurses or psychologists or doctors, try to mix them all up. And that's a much healthier and richer environment. And the essential commitments here as well for supervision is time, commitment to regular sessions, organisational support for both parties. And the organisation may prevent parties seeking out supervision. They may, for some reasons that I've explored already, sort of leaving the ward, leaving them, holding the baby as such. That's maybe how it's perceived, rather than a sort of medium to longer term of actually you're going to get a more competent and confident member of staff in the medium to longer run if you do let them go to supervision. So staff and supervisors need to be committed to their regular space and to getting that. As I say to supervisees, it's a commitment to yourself and you've got to go for it. And for the supervisors, they really need to honour and respect the fact that the supervisee is giving up the time and not reschedule at the last minute, because that will affect and damage the trust that is being built in the relationship. You've got to turn up regularly, and you've got to turn up when you say you're going to turn up. That is so important. Thank you.